Starting in the very earliest days, there have been those who have been captivated by the very essence of the automobile, by its mechanical challenges, and by the possibility it presented for freedom and opportunity. This is the story of three brothers and their passion for all things automotive. It begins in our nation's heartland, crisscrosses America, and becomes inextricably interwoven into the fabric of the young and blossoming Southern California car culture.
California was the promised land for the Justice brothers and the Justice family. Coming out of the Midwest, they have the Midwestern roots that you find in so many American icons like Walt Disney and others. They were raised with that middle America morals, ethics, feelings, the love of country, all that. And they saw California as their promised land because this was the heartland of the automobile and where things were happening.
World War I was just winding down, and the entire country was on the verge of a love affair with the newly invented automobile that would last into the next century. Ed, Zeke, and Gus were born during these years in the small farming town of Paola, Kansas. The time was right, and the unique combination of traits and talents passed down from their parents would help propel the boys on a lifelong automotive odyssey. Their father, H.M. Justice, was an auctioneer, which, particularly in those days, required the ability to think fast on your feet and a certain flair for showmanship. These traits found fertile ground in the young psyche of Ed in particular, who, throughout his career, found it hard to turn down a good demonstration or promotional scheme. But it was their mother, Anna, who really got the boys rooted in what would become their lifelong passion for the automobile.
She was really the inspiration for us to be mechanical. She's the one that made us open a bicycle shop, restring wheels, repaint the bicycles.
Actually, the first sign of Justice Brothers was Justice Brothers on a tree of a big maple tree, and it said, "Bicycles for sale or rent." Well, I would build the bicycles and then string the wheels, and then Ed would paint them all up and stripe them. We had about 6 or 8 bicycles that people come up on Sundays and Saturdays, the girls around town, and older people, and rent them and do their riding.
After we built bicycles and we'd rent them 25 cents an hour on Sunday, we went to a race in Kansas City with a friend. We weren't old enough to drive on the highway in the big city. So when we saw these little midgets and we found them in the Popular Mechanics, the California guys out here were way ahead of us in Kansas City, and they were building them.
And in our bedroom, well, we had from Popular Mechanics magazine and different pictures around, why we'd get these race cars and hang them on the wall of our bedroom. And our mother would keep saying, "You're just ruining my wallpaper, tacking those pictures up like that."
And we started writing to this man, Floyd Clymer, and he sent us plans on how to build a midget. And that's where we got our idea to build our first midget. We got it out of the Clymer magazine.
Armed with the ideas they got from the magazines and inspired by the real race cars they had seen in Kansas City, the boys set out to build their first race car. They were able to do this thanks to the help of a local machine shop owner.
He let us do anything we wanted in his shop, so we learned how to weld, we learned how to run machinery, little bitty guys, and that's where we built our first midget in the Ingersoll Drilling Rig Company's repair center, and it was a Whippet engine, a 4-cylinder Whippet that we put in this race car. We made a mistake and tried this car out on the public streets. And that's where it gave us a bad reputation that those boys go so fast and they're so fearless that they're not going to live very long. We flipped a midget one day, Zeke did.
So the mayor of the town was sitting down on the corner, and he come up and was so angry at us that he was just swearing. He says, "You take that car and get it off the street, and if I see you around here anymore, I'm going to throw you both in jail."
Besides getting a reputation for being a little on the wild side, the boys were also getting known for their ability to fix just about anything that could go wrong with an automobile.
People would have trouble with their cars around town, and I'd fix them for free. And my dad and mother would say, "Well, you know, you ought to get something." I said, "Well, I'm learning on this." I was so curious, I had to find out what was making that car work. And that's where I was getting my education, giving it to them free and getting a free education.
The automobile had worked its way into the daily lives of the folks from Paola, and that was just fine with Zeke, who loved learning all he could about fixing them. At about the same time, the nation was getting excited about air travel, and Ed's passion for airplanes led him to attend aircraft mechanic school. Following graduation, Ed headed west to work in the growing Douglas Aircraft Facility in Santa Monica, California. It was at a chance meeting that Ed made a contact that would turn out to play an important role in the saga of the Justice Brothers.
When Jim says, well, I managed the money for a 17-year-old boy that had inherited $56 million from his dad. You do? What do you do there? He says, we build race cars. I said, well, I've got a brother that's a good engineer who would like to come to California. Would you give him a job if I bring him out?
When Ed called me in California and said that he had a job, that could I get out there in 3 or 4 days, I said, well, I'm working at the Western Auto, and I had a real good job according to older people, and me as a young kid, my salary was as good as theirs. So I said, well, when I heard it was a machine shop and working with the racing crowd, I said, man, I'll be there.
It was a lucky stroke to put my brother in the middle of this. So Joel Thorne, being 17 or 18 years old, the rule in his shop was, look, guys, if I buy a car tonight in Ciro's over on the Strip, Sunset Strip, and I want the fenders cut, you got to table everything and fix my car. And that was otherwise, there's so much money, we could build anything we wanted and we didn't have to pay for it. So that's where we got our education on building cars.
It was a bunch of young guys that didn't have a lot of money, and they all just loved cars. And all these fellows today, like my dad and my uncles, never really dreamed about they were going to make a lot of money doing what they liked with cars. They just did it because they loved it, and they loved the automobile, and they loved racing.
The year was 1941. Ed was working his day job at Douglas Aircraft. Zeke was working at the Joel Thorne machine shop. After hours, both boys were working on race cars at a state-of-the-art machine shop with a talented group of fellow enthusiasts. Considering that the brothers had just recently moved out from Kansas, it seemed like everything was working out just fine. Then, as it did for folks all across the nation, World War II came along and the whole country was at war. Ed enlisted in the Air Force, and after stateside training shipped out to Europe, where he'd spend most of his military career as a flight engineer in England.
We did what we had to do. When I joined the ferry squadron, I first went into Wharton, England, and I'd test bombers every day. Then we'd turn the bomber over to the ferry squadron, and the ferry squadron would take it to the base where they had lost some planes yesterday. Every February was a bad month, so somebody in the group's going to get killed. So I thought, well, heck, I'll take my chances and I'll volunteer. When they lost 6 guys, I called Colonel Schooling and I said, I'd like to volunteer as a relief on the ferry squadron. I knew if I got in there, my ability was good enough that I could stay.
Zeke spent the war 6,000 miles away, making aircraft parts at Thorne Engineering. Here, he met up with another racer that would figure prominently in the story of the Justice Brothers, Frank Curtis.
So then all during the rest of the war, Frank was there, my boss, and we was running a drop hammer shop. And then later, it comes to the end of the war, and Joel Thorne loses a contract, or I guess it expired, and so we were all then going to be looking for a job. So Frank then went off and went to his race car shop down in 65th and San Pedro Street in Los Angeles. And then he came up one day to me, and when I had a little roadster shop in Glendale, and he says, hey Zeke, he says, I'm going to start building midgets now. I've got this new design that I've done, and he showed me the picture of it. I said, man, that's real good streamlining, Frank. And so he says, I'm going to go up here on Adams in Colorado. Do you want to work with me? I said, sure I do. And I was his first employee that went up there with Frank, and then we laid out the the framework and all that, and we started building race cars 6 at a time.
Curtis being a good engineer, Zeke being a sharp guy, they got together and they figured out how the tubes would be, what size, what wall, and that's what made them popular. They were strong, they were simple to work on, they were quality material, and they went out and made money. Sam Hanks came to us one day and says, I gotta get one of them Curtises, because when I go back to the Midwest, everybody that beats me anymore is a Curtis.
The Curtis midgets were tearing up tracks and taking home victories wherever they raced. A fair number of the cars were getting banged up in the races, and because the Curtis shop was so busy building new race cars, it could take months to get a damaged car repaired. Never once to shy away from opportunity, Ed and Zeke started working nights.
The guys, Justice Brothers, bodybuilders, was kind of in demand after 6 o'clock at night. So we'd work all day at Curtis, we'd come home, have dinner, and we'd work till 1 or 2 in the morning. We'd get up and go to work at 7 at Curtis, and that was our routine.
With so much after-hours repair work and offers to build new cars, Zeke came up with an idea to put the brothers in business on their own.
I said, well, heck, if we got all these cars to go, I'll buy the frames from Frank and all the parts, and then I'll go up here and start myself a race car shop. Well, I started all by myself, and then finally Frank come up there and would see me working on the thing, and he said, Ed, you know, Zeke needs your help up there. I think you better go up there and work with him. So that's actually Ed and I got our race car shop started across the street from Bob's Big Boy, and the guys were coming to us.
All was going well in the spring of 1947, but sensing the impending decline in the popularity of midget racing in Southern California, the boys were ready to make a big change in their lives.
Zeke ran into this product and saw this opportunity to end their days of pounding metal, so to speak. It wasn't that they didn't like it, but they could see that they were never going to get rich. And they just saw this product as the opportunity, the golden ring on the merry-go-round, and they grabbed it, and the rest is history. It was their big opportunity.
The California territory of the company they wanted to associate with was taken, so the boys looked around for another part of the country where they could set up shop.
So we didn't have the money for cold climate, so we decided Florida was about the hottest of the southern states where there'd be cars, and that's why we moved to Florida, Georgia, Cuba. We wanted to go farther south where we could always be in a shirt, and it wouldn't take any money, and we didn't have any money.
I had a 41 Ford station wagon loaded with 90 cases of oil and a trailer. And my brother Gus, who was married, and he had a 46 Buick convertible, and he would follow me. Ed had already went ahead of us back to Nebraska with his wife, and then we was to meet into Paola, Kansas, our old homestead.
The caravan now included Zeke, Ed, and his pregnant wife Maureen, and the oldest brother Gus and his wife Florence. After 5 days and too many flat tires to keep track of, the eastbound travelers arrived in their new home, Jacksonville, Florida. It was time for Ed and Zeke to reach back to their youth for the skill and courage it would take to launch their new career in the automotive oil additive business.
See, Ed and I were actually indirectly trained to be salesmen by our father talking to us, but we didn't want to be salesmen. We wanted to be mechanics. So we had the courage that both of us started that day together. And we met a guy there in Jacksonville that was a car dealer and sold used cars. And we made a demonstration to him, both of us selling together, and we sold him the oil. And that was our first sale. And from then on, we just would demonstrate, go to filling stations, talk, get acquainted with them, and demonstrate some more and put cars on the lift, show them how the car would actually run faster and better by reducing the friction of the engine and the rear end and transmission, all that. So just gradually got ourselves started.
From the earliest days and as the company grew, Gus became an indispensable member of the team. Although confined to a wheelchair following a car accident as a youth, Gus brought his invaluable business management skills to the new venture.
He was a money manager. He was an office manager. He kept people smiling whether we had money in the bank or not. You know, they'd say, Gus, shall I hold up part of the bills? No, go ahead and write the checks. We've always had an excellent reputation of paying our bills.
Gus, he was a guy that was always money. And he was a very cautious guy, and he figured it out. Like I said, mathematically, it had to work by the numbers. But I could see him look at Ed and I with awe. Sometimes you crazy too. You got more cuckoo ideas than you should have, but I'm going to go along with you because if you make any money, I'll be there, and I can't walk, and so I'm going to be there with you.
It wasn't only Gus who thought that some of the boys' ideas were a little out there. In their early days in Florida, the Justice brothers didn't always receive the warmest of welcomes, but their racing roots would again come to the rescue.
When they went down there, they were these West Coast whiz kids that came out of the Curtis factory. Their Midwestern roots were totally forgotten at that point. Now they had lived long enough in California that they became part of this whiz kid California scene. And so when they went to the South, particularly in that time, they were the slick guys from the West Coast.
We got acquainted again. We were in a nest of guys, Junior Johnson, Curtis Turner, the Flying Flocks. Those guys were all our buddies because we helped them. We'd sell oil during the day and help them build fenders or something, the hood on a stock car at night. So if we hadn't had our car background, no way we would have ever invaded Florida.
They'd see that we knew what we was talking about, the race cars, so they would agree, hey, go ahead and put your product in my car, and they found that it worked for them. And so that got our name around in the racing, and we'd put our advertising on it. And the stock car racing was an enhancement of our getting into business down there in Florida and Georgia.
So there they were. And so when NASCAR was formed, they had this product they were selling, and lo and behold, they went to their friends and they started using the product, and they ran the decals, and that was really what put them on the map.
If the oil additive could be considered the blood flowing through the veins of the new Justice Brothers company, the heart has to have been racing. Racing in all its forms, from midgets to the formative years of NASCAR, right up to include the pinnacle of U.S. motor racing, the Indy 500.
The road to Indianapolis started for the Justice Brothers in 1946, right after the war. And that was with Zeke, with the Thorn car. And they won with George Robeson. Zeke was involved in building of the first Curtis Craft Indy car, the Ross Page Special, that he and Emil Dietz built for Frank. Zeke became good friends with Chet Miller, who was the legendary Novi driver, among others. And the Justice Brothers and the crowd at Indianapolis and that whole Indianapolis scene became one.
Race car builder Frank Curtis again enters the picture to bring the brothers back to the Speedway in 1950.
Frank Curtis wrote to my uncle Zeke and expressed to him that he would be willing to let the Justice Brothers sponsor his factory Indy car, so to speak, team car, with the driver, Johnny Parsons, who was the '49 national champ, and this was at the tail end of 1949, as I said, for a small amount of money. So they go to Indianapolis. Johnny qualifies okay, not on the front row, but he qualifies well, goes out, gets into the lead, the rain comes, it's a rain-shortened race, and they win the race. They were so unprepared for a victory that they didn't even have any plans for a victory banquet, and they had to go out hurriedly after the race and find the Claypool Hotel downtown and set up a victory banquet. I mean, you talk about a shock. They, in their wildest dreams, never thought they would win. Now imagine you win your Indianapolis 500 the first time you ever try. Doesn't happen very often. But they come back in 1952 and get together with the Granatelli brothers, with the Grand Corps Automotive Special, and sponsor them with Jim Rathman, and they come back to get second place in 1952. So they had a first and a second within a matter of basically a span of 3 years.
In 1952, I had the fortune of meeting with Ed and Zeke Justice, who sponsored my car at Indianapolis. It was a Curtis Craft Offenhauser, and it was called the Win Friction Proofing Oil Special. It was great to be with them, and it was always a great relationship.
From designers and builders to mechanics and race team owners, it was, in a large part, the brothers' ability to establish and maintain lasting professional relationships that led to their success at the Brickyard. After achieving so much in such a short time, the Justice brothers would take a break from the Indy 500 for many years. But as history has shown, they would return to the Indiana Classic. The brothers were fully back in racing, and their distributorship was well established in the South. But another turn in the road was about to bring them back home to California.
They had been in Florida a long time, and they were ready to come home. The rest of the family was living in California. My dad had got them moved out there.
We come out on a Christmas vacation and a meeting of the organization.
They came upon at a distributor meeting Bill Klesick, who was a good friend of theirs, again, started out in the beginning of this business. Bill was very disenchanted with the way the company was going, the overall company.
Ed said, "Why don't you sell your business to me?" And he says, "All right, I'll do it." So Ed come back after that night and told Gus and I, he says, "Hey, we bought the business, old Bill, and he sold out to us."
The business that we took over here was fell from 1st to 46th and in sales.
So here they are. They were coming from the Florida distributorship, which was the #1 distributorship for this oil additive in the country that they had built, coming back to California with a market that had been decimated by a competitor. So basically they were having to restructure this marketplace.
Well, in the first 10 months we were here, we went from 46th to 1st in national sales. And then we started JB and went to worldwide distribution. It's just one of those things that the opportunity is there if you'll just put your thinking cap on and figure out what you got to do to make it work. And that's what we did.
The Justice brothers were back in California where they'd always wanted to be. They'd taken over an ailing distributorship, grown it to be #1 in the nation, and then gone out on their own one more time. And as always, the road toward this latest success just happened to lead right to the nearest racetrack. While the new California-based operation would get involved in all forms of motorsport, the most significant relationships grew out of the new sport of drag racing.
I think the first time that I became acquainted with the Justice brothers in action was out at Pomona Raceway in the early years when we were running there in the 1950s. I think with their product that they were certainly pioneers in the early days of oil additives, and there was a lot of stiff competition at that time, but they were one of the forerunners, and again, I think their credibility was based upon they were so well accepted because of the position of active running in automobile racing.
It was shortly after they returned to California that the brothers began to notice an up-and-coming racer who had also recently made the move west from Florida.
So the Justice brothers have come from Florida now to the West Coast in Southern California, and up shows this drag racer by the name of Don Garlits. And he had already gotten a big name for being the fast guy out of the South and taking on all comers and these match races and beat them. And they wondered, how did this guy come out of Florida and not end up with one of our stickers on his car? Well, Zeke goes out to Fontana Drag Strip to find out who this guy is and get a chance to meet him. And he meets Don and makes a deal, and that was the beginning of a long relationship. And that was Don's major sponsor for over 20 years.
You know, when I was really working with the Justice Brothers was in California about 1965. We were having a big race, the Mickey Thompson 200-mile-an-hour race, and they were out in full force for that event. That was the first sponsorship for me. It was $1,000 for one whole year, major sponsorship. And that was the beginning of my professional career, and I've had sponsors ever since. I've known the fellows for a long time. They're really great guys, and it was a pleasure working with them in the old days.
The Justice Brothers always recognized the importance of racing sponsorship, and when they formed their own company, their new logo would grace the bodywork of many a drag racer. That support continues today among some of the top contenders on the quarter mile.
And they used racing and their friendship and the ability to talk about what they had done and they had accomplished to sell. And it is amazing in our business, so many people, because if you like cars and you're in the automotive business, it's a high probability you're in racing, either as a fan or as a participant. And so through that, it helped open the doors to get them in to these places to sell the product.
From drag racing to Indy cars and just about everything in between, the words Justice Brothers have become synonymous with racing. Airplanes, motorcycles, snowmobiles, and many amateur and club racers have flown the company colors. In the 1980s, the JB logo was carried on board Mike Reagan's River Assault boat as the President's son raced to set new over-the-water speed records. 1987 marked the return of the Justice Brothers to the Indy 500 as they sponsored the legendary A.J. Foyt for his 30th running of the Classic. For 1988, they teamed up with Supertex again to help sponsor his entry for Rocky Moran. In 97, JB sponsored World of Outlaws racing champion Steve Kinser. And in 98, their logo was on the nose of Greg Ray's car as he qualified for the front row at more than 221 miles per hour, just a few thousandths of a second off the pole. At the 83rd running of the 500 in 1999, Jeff Ward brought the company colors across the finish line in second place, and JB also sponsored the fastest rookie to qualify, John Hollinsworth. Today, the corporate headquarters of the Justice Brothers Company is located in Duarte, California. It's also the location of a world-class motorsport museum dedicated to the racing legacy created by Ed, Zeke, Gus, and their friends. Ed Jr. is at the helm of the company that produces and markets a leading line of car care products that are used around the world. The complete process, from manufacture to packaging to distribution, takes place at the Duarte facility. Ed Jr. has grown up with the company, spending much of his time as a youth helping out around the warehouse or traveling to racing venues and sales calls with his dad and Uncle Zeke. Both of the elder justices feel Ed Jr. is the perfect choice to lead the company into the future.
We have a tremendous heritage and a tremendous history in the product line, and my dad and uncles, that we have a certain obligation to stand up to a certain level when it comes to production of the product and what we do. And we try to do that every day.
Ed and I never had no fear of losing. We had an idea, and we wanted to pursue that idea, and then we just went to work doing it. And it's kind of, I always had in my mind, like Henry Ford says, you give the people the product they want, and they don't worry about the money, it'll be there. And that, I always had that in my mind.
We just don't want to be one of the regular companies. We want to be the best. And to strive to be the best, that's where the drive comes in. It just, whether you ever got the gold ring or not, you always had hopes that someday I'll grab that gold ring and they'll talk about us. And I think we've won that, that position. I hope we have, anyway. I hope we've won it.